The wind moved slow across the wide desert plain, carrying dust, heat, and the kind of silence that made a person feel small under the endless sky. It was the hour when the sun leaned low but still burned strong, throwing long shadows across the hard land. Travelers avoided that stretch unless they had no other choice, for the desert had its own laws, and none of them offered kindness. Yet on that lonely path walked a young maiden with a tired dress, worn shoes, and a heart carrying more weight than her small frame could manage. Her name was Leora, and every step she took sounded like a question she didn't dare say out loud. She had been wandering since dawn, unsure where she was heading, unsure who she was meant to be, unsure why life kept turning its back on her. Folks in her old town had their ways. Their ways often left little room for a girl who didn't fit the quiet mold they wanted. The men paid her no mind, not because she wasn't gentle or kind, but because her spirit was stronger than she realized. Some called her odd, others whispered she was cursed with a lonely path. She had heard enough careless words over the years to believe them. By afternoon, her voice cracked as she whispered into the dry wind, "No man wants me." A lone buzzard circled overhead, casting a shadow over her as she stumbled forward. Her breath came thin, her steps slowed, and the heat made her vision blur. She tried to hold on, but the desert didn't care for the weak. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, the world spinning around her. She pressed her palm into the sand, hoping to push herself back up, but her arm trembled. She closed her eyes, telling herself this was how her story would end, alone in a place that swallowed the forgotten. But the desert wasn't empty. Not far from where she fell, an Apache warrior rode across the land on a chestnut horse, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. His name was Dakota, known in the plains as a man carved by hardship and discipline. The Apache carried the strength of his people in his shoulders and the patience of the old mountains in his breath. Those who met him knew he spoke only when needed, acted only with purpose, and judged no one without reason. He had left his camp before sunrise to search for water and check the boundary where their land met the open desert. He expected danger, maybe a lost traveler or stray cattle, but he didn't expect to find a maiden collapsed in the sun. From a distance, he noticed the still shape beside a cluster of yucca plants. He pulled the reins, slowed his horse, and narrowed his eyes. Most folks avoided his kind or feared his presence, but that never stopped him from doing what was right. Dakota guided his horse toward the fallen figure. As he reached her, he stepped down and approached with measured steps. He knelt beside her and saw her face pale from the heat, her dress torn from long travel, and her lips dry like cracked clay. Her heartbeat fluttered like a bird trapped in a cage. She tried to open her eyes when she sensed someone near, but the world refused to come into focus. She didn't see who stood over her, only felt a shadow blocking the sun from burning her further. "You should not be out here alone," Dakota said, his voice calm like the early morning air. Leora tried to speak, but her voice barely made a sound. Her fingers twitched, as if asking for help but also afraid to take it. Dakota lifted her gently, as though she weighed no more than a handful of feathers, and carried her toward his horse. She didn't know who he was, only sensed strength in the arms that held her. She felt her cheek rest against his chest, and the faint sound of his heartbeat steadied her own for a moment. He placed her carefully on the saddle, mounted behind her, and guided the horse toward the riverbed where cool water waited under the shade of mesquite trees. As the wind brushed past them, Leora managed to whisper the words that had chased her all the way across the desert. "No man wants me." Dakota heard the pain in those words, the kind that didn't come from the sun or the journey, but from years of carrying wounds no one else could see. He stayed silent for a long moment, choosing his thoughts with the same care he used when drawing his bow. When they reached the water, he helped her down and let her drink from his canteen. Her hands trembled, and her voice wavered as she asked, "Why help me?" Dakota didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched her with an expression she couldn't read, something between curiosity and understanding. "A life is a life," he said at last, "and you still have much ahead of you." She felt the weight of his words as she looked around, realizing she wasn't as alone as she once believed. Yet she also felt a question rising inside her, one too heavy to ask. She didn't know whether he would leave her once she recovered or whether he had other plans she couldn't see. Dakota studied her again, noticing the quiet sadness she tried to hide. Her world had pushed her aside, but something in her eyes told him she still hoped for a place where she belonged. The Apache believed that every person had a path written for them, even when they couldn't see it. "You will not return to where you came from," he said with calm certainty. Leora looked up, startled. "Then where will I go?" Dakota stood tall, the desert wind stirring the long strands of his hair as if the land itself waited for his answer. He reached out his hand toward her, firm yet steady. "With me," he said, "until you find who you truly are." Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what kind of man would offer such a promise, nor why he felt moved to take her along. She didn't know his world, his ways, or the dangers that came with walking beside an Apache. All she knew was that he didn't look at her with pity or judgment. He looked at her like she had worth. Still, questions stormed inside her. What would his people think of a lost maiden joining their camp? Would she be accepted, or would she face a new kind of rejection? And why did this warrior, who seemed to belong to the land itself, choose to take her in? Dakota waited for her answer, but before she could speak, a distant rumble echoed across the desert. The ground seemed to tremble beneath them. Dakota's eyes narrowed as he turned toward the horizon. Dust rose in the distance, fast and heavy. Like the warning of trouble racing their way, Leora followed his gaze, fear shifting in her chest. She didn't know what was coming, only that Dakota suddenly stepped in front of her, ready to shield her from whatever approached. The desert. Once silent, now carried the sound of danger drawing near. And in that moment, Leora understood that her path with the Apache was only beginning, and the next step might change everything. The sound in the distance kept rising, a deep rolling beat that didn't belong to the wind. Leora felt her chest tighten as dust spun upward far across the desert floor, shaping itself into a long trail stretching toward them. Dakota stood firm, one hand on the horse's reins, the other resting near the small blade at his belt. His calm didn't break, but the tension in his shoulders told her he recognized trouble long before she did. She tried to steady her breath, though her legs felt weak beneath her. She had no idea who or what was coming, only that the warrior in front of her no longer looked simply cautious. He looked ready. Dakota moved slightly, shifting his stance so he was between her and the approaching dust cloud. "Stay close," he said. The words were low, steady, but they carried weight. He didn't raise his voice or show panic, which only made her wonder what kind of danger could shake the land enough to draw such a guarded tone from someone like him. Leora gripped the fabric of her dress and tried to focus, but her mind ran in many directions. She had barely survived the desert heat, and now something else threatened to swallow the moment of safety she had found beside the riverbed. Her heart raced faster as she watched Dakota narrow his eyes, studying the horizon with deep attention. His stance told her he was ready to fight if needed, and she realized that whatever came toward them was no small matter. He stepped forward, raising one hand for silence, though she hadn't spoken a word. His eyes stayed locked on the fast-moving trail of dust. Leora looked harder and could finally make out shapes, faint and distant, but moving with purpose. Horses. Several of them. Riding hard, riding fast. "Are they your people?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No." The single word sent a cold shiver through her. Dakota turned to the horse, tightening the straps and checking the blanket beneath the saddle. His movements were swift, focused, practiced. He had done this many times before, and that alone told her the riders approaching were not friendly travelers. "You must mount," he said. Leora's breath caught. "Are we running?" "Not unless we have to." She climbed onto the horse with shaky hands. Dakota remained on the ground for a moment longer, as though weighing the direction of the wind, the speed of the riders, and the risk of staying put. He glanced over his shoulder, his dark eyes steady on hers. "No matter what happens, do not leave my side." The horse shifted beneath her, sensing the tension around them. Leora pressed her hands against the saddle horn to steady herself. She didn't know who chased them or why, but she felt deep in her bones that Dakota had stepped into danger because of her. That truth pressed heavy on her heart as the riders drew closer. Tokuda finally swung himself up behind her, settling with the ease of someone who had lived half his life in the saddle. He clicked his tongue softly, guiding the horse past the riverbank and toward a path leading between jagged rocks. The horse obeyed, hooves kicking up loose sand as they moved. Leora looked back once, seeing the riders more clearly now. There were 4 of them, maybe 5, spaced apart but moving in a tight line. Their clothes were dust-coated, their hats pulled low, their movements sharp and direct. Whoever they weren't strangers to rough land. "Who are they?" she whispered. "Men who wander with greed," Tokuda answered. "Men who take what is not theirs." Her heartbeat thudded. She remembered stories in her town, whispered tales of scavengers who roamed the outskirts, searching for weak travelers or abandoned camps. She had never believed those stories fully, but seeing the riders now, their pace quickening, the danger became real. Tokuda guided the horse deeper between the rocks, giving them cover from the open plain. They reached a narrow break where the land curved upward, creating a shaded ridge. He slowed the horse and breathed deeply, listening to the sounds around them. Leora strained to hear what he heard, but all she caught was the pounding of her own heart. The rider's hoofbeats bounced across the dry earth, echoing closer. She pressed her fist to her chest, unsure whether fear or exhaustion made her tremble more. Tokuda leaned forward slightly, placing one steady hand over her shoulder. "You are safe with me," he said. She wanted to believe him fully, but she also knew he was outnumbered. She had no weapon, no strength, no place in this harsh land. Yet he didn't treat her as a burden. He treated her as someone worth protecting, as the hoofbeats drew nearer. Tokuda guided the horse higher up the ridge and then stopped. From there he could look down at the open stretch below without being seen easily. The riders reached the riverbed and paused, scanning the ground. Leora watched them from above, nerves twisting inside her. One of the men dismounted and bent near the water, studying the footprints. He stood again, pointing toward the ridge where Tokuda and Leora hid. "They know we came this way," she whispered. "Yes," Tokuda said. "But they do not know the land as I do." He tugged lightly on the reins and moved the horse along a narrow trail shielded by tall rocks. The path wound upward toward the hills, a place where only those familiar with Apache land knew the safe routes. Leora clung tightly, trying not to look down the steep drop beside them. Her breath hitched each time the horse stepped over loosened stones. "Why are they following us?" she asked. "They were following you," he said. She turned her head slightly. "Me?" Tokuda nodded. "You crossed a place where many travelers do not walk alone. Someone saw you. They follow anyone they believe they can profit from." Leora's stomach knotted. She had left her town thinking she carried nothing worth stealing. No money, no jewelry, no land. Only a worn dress and a life nobody seemed to want. "But I have nothing," she said. Tokuda guided the horse carefully along the ridge. "Some men chase not for riches. Some chase out of cruelty, and some chase because they sense someone has no one to defend them." Leora swallowed hard. The words made her understand why Tokuda had grown alert the moment he spotted the dust trail. She wasn't just lost. She had been marked. The trail opened onto a flat ledge overlooking a deep valley. Tall mesas stood in the distance, cut by long shadows. The land stretched far and wild, carrying secrets older than any town. Tokuda stopped the horse and listened again. The riders below were searching but not yet climbing, for now they had time. Leora breathed slowly, trying to calm herself. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with sincerity. Tokuda didn't answer right away. Instead, he dismounted and helped her down, his hands steady around her arms. When her feet touched the ground, she nearly collapsed from weakness. And he held her upright. "You must drink more water," he said. "Your body has not recovered." He led her toward a shaded spot between 2 stone walls that formed a small shelter. He gave her another drink and tore a piece of cloth from his own sash, dipping it in the remaining water to cool her forehead. His touch was careful, respectful, focused on keeping her alive rather than comfortable. "Why did you leave your people?" he asked gently. She hesitated. The question stirred pain she had tried to bury. "I didn't belong," she said. "They said I brought trouble. that my presence made life harder. They said no man would ever want me. Dakota studied her quietly. Your worth is not for others to decide. His tone held no softness, only truth. She felt tears sting her eyes, though she fought them back. She had learned long ago that crying never changed the minds of those who judged her. Dakota reached into his satchel and offered her a piece of dried food. Eat, he said. Strength will return. She nodded and took it with trembling fingers. As she ate, he moved to the edge of the ridge and studied the valley below. The riders had split apart, some circling, others climbing from a different angle. They were determined. Will they find us? She asked. He turned only his head, his expression unreadable. They might, her breath faltered. What do we do then? We move before they corner us, he said. But to go forward, you must be able to stand, walk, and hold to the horse without fainting. Leora tried to straighten her back, gathering what little strength she had. The Apache nodded as though she had passed an unseen test. But then his eyes sharpened, catching movement beyond the lower ridge. Another dust trail. Smaller, faster, approaching from the west. Leora followed his gaze and felt dread rise inside her. More riders. This time too quick, too focused to be passing travelers. Takeda's jaw tightened. Now they weren't just being followed. They were being surrounded, and the land around them grew quiet. As if the desert understood that the next choice they made would decide everything that came after Dakota. Watched the second dust trail with a long, steady stare. Reading the land and the riders the way other men read letters. The first group hunted from the east, slow and patient. The smaller group from the west moved like a knife aimed straight at the ridge. Leora could tell from his face that this was not chance. Someone had decided this stretch of desert would not let them pass easily. Are they all the same men? She asked, trying to keep her voice from shaking. No, Dakota said. Different horses, different way of riding. But they speak to each other with smoke, with signs on the ground. They know you are here. The thought that strangers spoke of her in secret ways filled Leora with a strange mix of fear and anger. She had spent years being ignored. Now men she had never met chased her as if she were some kind of prize. It made her feel exposed, as if the desert had peeled away the last thin cover she had left. Dakota turned from the view and met her eyes. We move now. He guided her back to the horse. Her legs still felt like water, but his hand at her elbow steadied her. Once she was in the saddle, he mounted behind her and steered the horse along the ridge, searching for a path that would carry them through the stone maze before the riders could close the circle. The trail grew narrow, forcing them close to the cliff wall. Sunlight struck the rock, scattering hot light across their faces. What do these men want? She asked. Some chase anything weaker than themselves, Dakota said. Some were once soldiers. The war ended, but they cannot live in peace. They ride with empty hearts and fill them with trouble. Leora thought of the men in town who spent their days leaning against saloon posts, eyes dull, hands idle. Men with no farmland, no trade, nothing to build. She had seen how some of them looked at wandering women, measuring them like objects. The memory made her grip the saddle tighter. The path began to descend, curling around the side of a tall hill. As they rode, the sound of the riders shifted behind them, then faded. For a moment she wondered if they had lost them. Dakota did not relax, though. His back stayed straight, his hands light but firm. Did you grow up out here? She asked, wanting to understand him better. He nodded. My people's camp is not far. We live where the river bends through the cottonwoods. Children run free there. The elders keep watch. We share what we have. His voice held quiet pride. Leora drew in a slow breath. And they will accept me, she asked. The question cut deeper than the danger they faced. Her whole life had been shaped by the word no. No place at the table. No kindness without a price. No promise of a husband. No welcome that lasted. She feared hearing it again, even from strangers whose language she barely knew. Dakota hesitated. Some will not trust you, he said. Not at first. The world has not treated us gently. We have learned to look twice at anyone who comes from the towns. There are broken promises scattered across our land like old bones. His honesty stung, yet it also gave her a strange comfort. He did not pretend things would be simple. He respected her enough to tell the truth. "Then why take me?" she asked. "Why not leave me there in the desert?" Dakota guided the horse around a sharp bend before he answered. "Because when I found you, you were already left behind by everyone else. A person who has nothing is often the one who understands the value of shelter. My people need hearts that remember how to protect, not harm." His words stuck with her. Could she really be someone who brought value to others, not just trouble? The thought seemed too big to hold, yet the warmth of it settled quietly inside her. They reached a narrow passage where the rocks opened into a hidden wash. In the shade grew short scrub and a few twisted trees clinging to life. Dakota slowed the horse and listened again. The hoofbeats returned, faint and scattered. The riders had changed direction. Some were climbing higher. Some circled wide. "They are spreading like a net," he said. "They hope to drive us into the open. We will confuse them instead," Hal Leora asked. He slid down from the saddle and motioned for her to stay seated. He moved along the dry wash and pressed his hand into the sand, then lifted it and let the grains fall. "The wind turns," he said. "It will carry our tracks in one direction if we are smart." He led the horse carefully, choosing the firmest patches of ground and gliding between stone and scrub so their passing left only broken shadows instead of clear hoofprints. Leora watched each step, amazed at how he seemed to speak with the land in a language she could not hear as they moved. The air shifted, bringing a faint smell of smoke. Leora laid a hand on Dakota's arm. "Do you smell that?" she whispered. His jaw tightened. "Campfire," he said. "Not ours." "But whose?" she asked. "Could be those men," he said. "Could be settlers. Could be someone lost. Fire is both comfort and danger." For a moment she saw another path open in her mind. If there were settlers nearby, maybe even people from a town, could she find shelter with them instead? Women, families, a church bell calling the faithful. It was the world she knew, even if it had turned its back on her. She thought of trying to reach them, to ask for help. But then she remembered how much fear some townsfolk carried toward Apache camps. If those settlers saw Dakota, they might reach for rifles first and questions later. She suddenly realized that no matter where she turned, she stood between two worlds that distrusted each other. "Dakota," she said softly, "my people see your people as enemies. They speak of raids and battles. They forget the reasons behind them. If that campfire belongs to settlers and they see you with me, they might believe you stole me." "I know," he said. "The story men tell is often chosen before the truth can speak. That is why we move unseen." The sun slid lower, pushing long streaks of red across the sky. Night would come soon, and night had its own rules. Riders could get lost in the dark, but so could those who ran from them. They reached a fork in the wash. One path led toward low hills, the other toward a dry open plain. Dakota paused, feeling the ground with his palm again. Then he made a choice. "We go toward the hills," he said. "The camp is that way, but we must reach it without leading wolves to the door." Leora's heart stirred at the word camp. Somewhere ahead stood people who knew him by name, who shared his blood and stories. Somewhere ahead might also stand those who questioned why he brought a fragile stranger from the town into their circle. The idea of facing their eyes made her stomach flutter. "Tell me about them," she said as they rode. "Your family. Your home." He seemed to search for the right memory. Then his voice softened. "I have a younger sister," he said. "Her name is Naira. She is strong and sharp with words. She thinks I take life too serious. She cares for the children and argues with the elders when she believes they forget the old kindness." Leora smiled a little at the picture. "She sounds brave." "She is," he said. "But she fears losing those she loves. We already buried more than one brother. She will not be pleased that I ride with trouble at my heels. Yet she will feed you first, then speak her anger." The thought of a woman like that waiting by the fire gave Leora a strange ache. She had never had a sister, never had anyone who would scold and protect in the same breath. The idea of being welcomed, even with sharp words, It felt like a dream. As they moved closer to the hills, the sound of the riders shifted again. Echoes bounced strangely off the stone, making it hard to tell where they came from. Tokuda guided the horse into a narrow cut, then halted and helped Leora down. "From here we walk," he said. "The horse stays hidden. If they find him, they will know we are near, but he will also slow them. With our feet on stone, we leave little trace." He led the horse into a slot between two boulders and tied him loosely where he could still move and graze on sparse grass. Tokuda pressed his forehead briefly against the animal's neck, a quiet promise that he would return if he could. Then he turned to Leora. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, though her legs trembled. "I will keep up," she said. "I will not be the reason you fall behind." His eyes met hers with quiet respect. "You are already stronger than when I found you," said. They climbed a steep, narrow path where only goats and sure-footed hunters usually passed. Tokuda moved ahead, testing each hold before offering his hand to her. Leora's fingers slid against warm stone, then caught on rough edges. Dust clung to her dress, and small pebbles rolled under her shoes. The climb forced her to focus on each step instead of the fear behind them. In its own way, that helped. Halfway up, they heard voices float on the wind. Men shouted to one another in rough English, cursing and trading orders. Leora froze against the rock, her breath shallow. Tokuda raised his hand in warning, his body still as part of the cliff. The voices were close, be just below, on a wider trail. One man laughed, a hard sound with no joy. "She can't be far," he said. "A lone girl in the desert, easy reward," another man answered. "And the Apache with her. There's coin for his head, too." Some ranchers would pay good money to be rid of one more of them. Leora's chest burned with shame and anger. They spoke of Tokuda like an animal to be hunted, like a threat instead of the man who had saved her life. And they spoke of her as nothing but bait. She felt Tokuda's hand find hers, squeezing once, firm and brief. The touch told her not to move, not to answer the words with any sound. It also reminded her she was no object. To him, she was someone worth crossing danger for. The men's voices drifted away as they followed the lower trail. Tokuda waited a little longer, listening until the sound faded. Only then did he guide her onward. When they finally reached the top of the ridge, the land opened toward the distant river valley. Smoke from the unseen camp curled softly into the reddening sky, a quiet signal of home. Leora's heart rose at the sight, yet her relief was thin. Held in place by the knowledge that the riders were still behind them, still hungry for blood and fear, Tokuda stood beside her, scanning every rise and hollow. His people were somewhere ahead, unaware that trouble rode toward them with the coming night. And beside him stood a woman who had never truly belonged anywhere, about to step into a new world where every look, every word, might decide whether she was seen as guest burden or something far more dangerous. The desert wind cooled as the first stars blinked awake above them. Far below, voices still echoed, faint and distant. The chase was not over. The hardest choices had not yet been made. The stars brightened overhead as night settled across the ridge, painting the land in silver shadows. The air cooled quickly, carrying the sharp scent of stone and dry grass. Leora wrapped her arms around herself as she followed Tokuda along the narrow ledge. Each step felt heavier, yet she pressed on, driven by fear and the small spark of hope flickering inside her. Ahead lay the Apache camp, a place she had never imagined stepping foot in, yet now it stood as her only refuge. Behind them lay men who hunted her for reasons she didn't understand, men who saw Tokuda as prey, not a protector. Tokuda paused at the edge of the ridge and lowered himself to the ground, motioning for her to do the same. Leora crouched beside him as he scanned the dark stretches behind them. Torches flickered faintly in the distance. Horses moved like shadows across the plain. The riders had not given up. If anything, they moved with more purpose now. "They are splitting again," Tokuda said quietly. "Some take the lower path to circle from the south. One climbs from the north." Her heart tightened. "How do they know where we are going?" she whispered. "They do not know exactly," he said. "But they know the river is near. Any wounded or lost person will head toward water, and they believe you are weak." Leora bristled at the words. She had always known her life was small in the eyes of others, but hearing it spoken so plainly burned her pride. Still, Tokoda meant no insult. He meant danger, not judgment. "They will reach the river by sunrise," Tokoda continued. "But we can reach my people before then if we take the old trail." "What is the old trail?" she asked. Tokoda rose slowly, offering her his hand. "A path my father showed me as a boy. It is narrow and steep. Many avoid it. But it will take us close to the camp, faster than any other way." She took his hand and stood. "Then we go." He studied her for a moment, as if measuring whether she understood the risk. Something in her eyes must have convinced him, because he nodded and started forward. They walked along the ridge until the trail dipped into darkness between two leaning cliffs. Leora felt the weight of the night close around them, the sounds of the world fading behind stone walls. Their footsteps echoed softly, and loose pebbles skittered down the slope. Tokoda walked ahead, stopping often to listen, to feel the earth with his palms, to decide whether to turn or climb. His calm confidence gave Leora the strength to keep moving. She found herself trusting him more than she had trusted anyone in years. He did not treat her as fragile, though he saw her weakness. He did not demand anything from her, but effort. With each step she took, she felt something inside her shift, as if the desert had burned away the old doubts and left room for something new. But danger pressed behind them like a heavy shadow. They reached a narrow crack in the cliffside, barely wide enough for one person to pass at a time. Tokoda slipped through and motioned for her to follow. She pressed her shoulders sideways and eased herself into the dark slit, feeling the cold rock scrape her dress. The passage twisted downward, and for a moment she feared she would get stuck. Tokoda reached back, grabbing her hand and guiding her into the open again. Ahead lay a hidden basin. Moonlight spilled across the stones, lighting a quiet pool fed by a thin trickle of water from the rocks. It looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos trailing behind them. Tokoda stopped at the edge and crouched, dipping his fingers into the water. "We will rest here for a moment," he said. "We must regain strength before climbing the last rise." Leora knelt beside him, cupping water in her hands. The cold freshness revived her a little. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her breath steadying. When she looked up, she found Tokoda studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "What is it?" she asked. "You have fear," he said softly. "But you do not let it stop you. Many stronger than you would have fallen long ago." She dropped her gaze, warmth spreading through her chest. "I am tired of falling," she said, "and tired of being left behind." Tokoda's voice deepened. "You are not left behind now." Before she could answer, a faint sound echoed through the basin. A horse snorted. A rock clattered. The hair on the back of her neck rose. Tokoda stood instantly, his body still and sharp like a drawn arrow. "They found the trail," he whispered. Leora's heart lurched. "They are close." Tokoda grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the far side of the basin. "We go up," he said. Quickly, they climbed a rough slope of jagged stone. Leora slipped twice, scraping her palms, but Tokoda caught her each time. The sounds below grew louder, voices harsh and confident, metal clinking, boots striking stone. "They know we are near," she whispered, breath trembling. "Yes," he said. "But they do not know the land as I do." They reached the top of the rise, and Tokoda led her toward a line of low bushes growing along the ridge. Beyond them lay a narrow path that wound upward over the cliffs. This had to be the old trail he spoke of. But before they could continue, a sharp whistle echoed below. Leora froze. Tokoda looked back over his shoulder. "They see the water. They will search the basin now." Leora's pulse thundered. "Will they track us up here?" "Not easily," he said. "But they will try." He motioned for her to move ahead along the narrow path. Leora stepped carefully, heart pounding. The drop to their left was steep, falling into shadowy rocks. She tried not to look down. The path grew thinner, forcing her to press against the cliff. The stones scraped her arms, but she did not stop. A shout rose behind them. Tokoda turned. his eyes narrowing. One of the riders had reached the basin and discovered the footprints on the slope. Another voice followed, calling others to join him. Leora tried to move faster, but the trail became so thin she had to place each foot with care. Dakota stayed close behind, ready to steady her if she slipped. The moon lit the path just enough for them to see the turns ahead. "They are climbing," Dakota said under his breath. Her chest tightened. "Will they catch us?" "Not if we reach the ridge first." "And then what?" she asked. "Then we reach my people before the riders do." They continued climbing, the sounds behind them growing sharper. The men were determined. Leora could hear their heavy steps, their curses, their threats that echoed across the stone. The more she heard, the more she understood the danger she faced. These men were not simply chasing them for sport. There was something else driving them, something unspoken. "What do they want with me?" she asked suddenly, unable to hold the fear back. Dakota kept climbing. "I do not know," he said, "but they speak like men who have chased others before. You crossed their path when you were alone in the desert. They saw weakness and believed it would be easy to take advantage." "Take me where?" she whispered. "I will not let them take you anywhere." Something in the firmness of his words steadied her. She kept climbing, pushing past the pain in her legs. Her breath came sharp, but she did not stop. At the top of the ridge, the land opened again. Below them lay the wide valley where the river cut through the earth. And in the distance, faint but real, flickered the small lights of Dakota's camp. Leora's eyes widened. "We are close," she breathed. Dakota nodded. "Yes, but the riders are close too." As if to prove him right, the sharp crack of a stone echoed behind them. A rider had reached the last turn of the trail, his silhouette rising against the rocks. He spotted them and let out a low shout. More followed. "They know exactly where we are now," Leora said. Dakota grabbed her hand and pulled her into a run across the ridge. The ground sloped downward in a long curve toward the valley floor. It wasn't a smooth descent, but a rough field of scattered stones, brush, and hidden holes. Running in the dark was dangerous, but staying meant worse. Dakota slowed only enough to keep her from falling. "The camp is there," he said. "In the cottonwoods. Once we reach the river, they cannot follow easily. My people know the land." The riders climbed higher behind them, their shouts growing louder. Leora felt her heart slamming against her ribs. She ran as hard as she could, her feet stumbling, her breath burning. Dakota never let go of her, guiding her around rocks and pulling her upright each time her knees weakened. Finally, they reached the slope and began the fast descent. Loose stones rolled under their feet. Leora slipped once and nearly fell, but Dakota caught her around the waist. Pulling her close before pushing forward again, the riders appeared on the ridge behind them. Dark shapes against the moonlit sky. One raised a rifle. A shot cracked through the air, hitting a stone near their feet. Leora screamed as fragments flew, but Dakota shielded her with his body and pulled her toward a cluster of boulders. "They are shooting at us," she gasped. "They will not stop," he said. "But we keep moving." They dashed from rock to rock, each time gaining ground toward the valley. The river's faint shimmer appeared below them, and beyond it, shadows moved. Figures, people. "Your people," she whispered in relief. Dakota did not slow. "They see us," he said, "but they do not yet know what follows." The riders descended behind them, nearly reaching the slope. Their horses whinnied sharply as they navigated the rough land. The men shouted again, urging the animals forward despite the danger. Dakota gripped Leora's hand harder. "This is our last run," he said. "When I say to run, do not stop for anything." She nodded, chest tight. He looked into her eyes. "Trust me." "I do," she said. Taco drew in a steadying breath, then pointed toward the river. "Run!" Leora ran with everything she had left, her breath sharp in her chest, her legs trembling under her, yet she didn't slow. The river glimmered ahead like a silver promise under the moon. And Dakota stayed at her side, guiding her toward the cottonwoods that marked the edge of his people's land. The shouts behind them grew louder as the riders pushed their horses harder, determined to close the distance. Another gunshot cracked, echoing through the valley, but this time the bullet struck a distant rock and split harmlessly. Leora flinched, fear rising inside her again, yet Takoda's steady presence kept her moving. They reached the riverbank just as shadows emerged from between the trees. Apache figures stepped forward, bows drawn, spears ready, silently assessing the danger. Takoda raised his hand to show peace, and his people recognized him instantly. Two warriors moved to his side, the lines on their faces tightening as they spotted the riders descending the slope behind them. Leora stumbled the last few steps, her knees almost giving out. A woman rushed toward her, strong and sharpened, supporting her before she fell. Leora realized this must be Naira, Takoda's sister, the one he had spoken of with a mix of affection and caution. Naira steadied her with surprising gentleness. Though her gaze flicked between Leora and the riders with fierce concern. "Who follows you?" Naira asked. "Men who seek harm," Takoda replied. They chased her across the desert. Naira's jaw tightened. She nodded once and signaled to the warriors. The Apache moved swiftly, spreading out along the riverbank, hiding themselves among the trees and brush, ready to protect their land. Takoda pulled Leora behind a thick cottonwood trunk and crouched with her. "You are safe now," he said quietly, placing one hand on her shoulder. She leaned into him, exhausted, barely able to stand. "My people will not allow harm to come to you." The riders reached the bottom of the slope, their horses breathing hard, their clothes coated in dust. They slowed when they saw the shadows in the trees, realizing too late they were outnumbered and standing on Apache ground. One man raised his rifle only to have an arrow thud into the ground inches from his boot. Another warrior stood atop a nearby boulder, bow drawn, daring the riders to test their luck. The lead rider cursed and pulled his horse back, looking from Takoda's people to the narrow path behind him. "Fine," he growled. "Keep your land. But that girl belongs to us." Takoda stepped forward before Leora could even react. "She belongs to no one," he said, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of stone. The rider spit into the dirt. "She crossed our path. We found her first." Takoda didn't flinch. "I found her dying in the desert. If she had remained in your hands, she would not be alive now." The man's face twisted with anger, but he knew he had no power here. The Apache stood silent and ready, each warrior holding his weapon with absolute control. These riders hunted for opportunity and fear, not courage. Outmatched and exposed, they looked around once more, then slowly turned their horses away. "This isn't finished." The lead rider snapped before kicking his horse into motion, but the truth was plain. It was finished. They had lost. The riders disappeared into the night, the sound of their hooves fading until the valley held only the quiet breath of the river and the low hum of insects. Takoda remained still until he was certain they were gone. Only then did he return to Leora, who waited with Naira's arm around her for support. "You are safe now," he repeated softly. Leora felt her heart finally loosen, the fear draining from her like water, leaving a cracked bowl. Tears formed despite her efforts to hold them back. "Thank you," she whispered. "I would not be here without you." Takoda studied her with that calm, steady gaze she had grown to trust so deeply. "You walked your part of the path," he said. "I only guided you." Naira stepped forward then, folding her arms with a mix of curiosity and firm judgment. "Takoda brings someone home without warning," she said. "That alone tells me your journey was no easy one." Leora met her eyes, unsure whether to bow her head or stand firm. She chose honesty. "I came here because I had nowhere else. I did not ask him to risk himself for me." Naira watched her closely, then finally nodded. "Truth sits in your voice. You may stay tonight. The elders will decide more in the morning." Leora's chest tightened again, but this time with gratitude. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Takoda guided her toward the camp, where a fire crackled warmly under the trees. The air smelled of sage, roasted meat, and smoke. Children peeked from behind their mothers, curious about the newcomer. Elders murmured among themselves. Some looked cautious, others welcoming. Leora felt the weight of every gaze, yet none burned with cruelty. For the first time in her life, she felt watched, not in judgment but in wonder. Takoda helped her sit near the fire. A woman brought her a warm blanket to replace the torn fabric of her dress. Another offered her a wooden cup filled with calming tea made from local herbs. The warmth spread through her hands and into her tired bones. "You will rest here tonight," Tokuda said. "My people will keep watch." As the fire warmed her, Leora found her voice again. "Why did those men chase me?" she asked quietly. "I still do not understand." Toka sat beside her. "Some men see someone alone and believe harming them brings no consequence. They followed you not because of who you are, but because they thought no one would defend you." Leora looked toward the flames, her heart tightening with old hurt. "That is how I lived for many years," she said. "Nobody defended me. Nobody cared." Dakota turned to her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You are not nobody," he said, "and you are not alone now." She looked up at him, finding something in his expression she had not known existed in the world. A quiet respect, a kind of strength meant not for fighting, but for lifting. Night settled deep around them. The stars glimmered through the branches. The fear that had followed her across the desert slowly eased. She finished the tea and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her body finally relaxed, and she felt the heavy pull of sleep. "You should rest," Dakota said gently. "Tomorrow brings new steps." She nodded, her voice soft. "Will your people allow me to stay?" "Some will question," he admitted. "But they will see your heart, and I will speak for you." Leora felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "Why?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Dakota paused, choosing his words with care. "When I found you, I thought I was helping someone who needed a place. But as we traveled, I saw more. I saw someone strong in ways she does not yet see herself." Her breath caught. "I saw someone worth protecting," he added. She looked down, overwhelmed. All her life she had believed her worth was small. Yet this warrior, carved from strength and discipline, saw something she could not. That truth felt like the first sunrise after a long storm. Naira approached then, her tone softer than before. "A place by the fire is open for her," she said. "She may sleep here tonight." Tokuda nodded. "Thank you, sister." Leora settled on a soft bed of hides near the warmth of the flames. The crackling sound soothed her, and the distant murmur of voices blended into a gentle hum. She looked up at the stars through the cottonwood branches and released a slow breath. For the first time in her life, she did not feel unwanted. As she drifted toward sleep, her gaze found Takuda once more. He stood near the edge of the firelight, speaking quietly with two elders, explaining what had happened. His posture was confident, but his gaze softened whenever it flicked back to her. She closed her eyes. With a small smile, morning came with soft sunlight drifting through the leaves. Children's laughter broke the stillness. Women cooked near the fire, and men prepared their horses for the day's tasks. Leora woke with a sense of calm she had not felt in years. Tokuda approached her with a faint smile. "The elders talked," he said. Her breath held. "They say you may stay as long as you wish," he continued. "You will be welcomed. You will be protected. And you will have a place to belong." Leora covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes, but these were not tears of fear or sorrow. They were warm and grateful, born from the simple truth she had longed for. "A place to belong," she whispered. Takuda held out his hand, strong and certain. "If you choose it," he said, "you will walk this path with us. And you will not walk alone." Leora placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, steady and sure. In that moment, she felt the last pieces of her old life fall away, like dust in the wind. Her story no longer belonged to the shadows of rejection or fear. It belonged to a new dawn, a new land, and a new life shaped by courage, community, and the unexpected kindness of an Apache warrior who saw her worth when she could not. And from that day on, she walked forward with her head high, knowing she had found not just protection, but family, purpose, and a love born from the strength of two hearts that finally found a home